The first 50 years of exile were the hardest years in human history. People died by the millions. The planets of the void sector were not made for life. The air was thin and harsh. The soil would not grow crops. The water was buried deep underground and filled with minerals that made people sick. But humans did not give up. They never gave up. Dr. Maria Santos was a geneticist. She had been 28 years old when the exile began. Now she was an old woman with white hair and hands that shook when she worked. But she never stopped working. For 30 years, she had studied the alien soil of New Dawn. She had tested thousands of plant varieties. She had failed more times than she could count. But finally, in the 31st year of exile, she created a wheat strain that could grow in the gray dirt of their prison world. She stood in her laboratory, a simple room carved into the rock beneath the surface, and looked at the small green shoots pushing up through the soil. Tears ran down her face. "We will not starve," she whispered. "Our children will eat." Her discovery spread across all the exile worlds within months. Farmers planted the new wheat in fields that had been barren since the beginning. For the first time, people had enough food to eat. For the first time, children grew up without knowing hunger. Maria died 5 years later, but her work continued. Her students developed new crops, rice that grew in shallow cave pools, vegetables that needed almost no light, fruit trees that could survive the cold nights. The exile world slowly turned from gray to green. But food was only the beginning. Nathan Ford had been a young engineer when the Conclave threw humanity into darkness. He had watched his parents die on the transport ships. He had buried his sister in the rocky ground of New Dawn. He had every reason to give up, to let the anger and grief destroy him. Instead, he turned that anger into fuel. By the 60th year of exile, Nathan was the commander of Project Silence. It was humanity's most secret work. It was humanity's hope. The caverns beneath New Dawn stretched for hundreds of miles. They were natural formations, carved by water that had dried up millions of years ago. The exiles had expanded them, digging deeper and deeper into the rock, building laboratories and factories and shipyards far beneath the surface where the Conclave satellites could not see. Nathan walked through the main shipyard, his boots echoing on the metal floor. Around him, thousands of workers assembled pieces of what would become humanity's new fleet. But these ships were different from anything humans had built before. "The Conclave thinks they took everything from us," Nathan said to his deputy, Karen Mills. "They took our computers, our weapons, our engines, but they could not take our minds. They could not take our knowledge, and they could not take our will to survive." Karen nodded. She was a physicist who had spent 40 years studying the orbital platforms that watched over them. She knew every sensor, every detection system, every weakness. "The platforms are designed to detect conventional drive signatures," she said. "Ion engines, fusion reactors, antimatter cores. If we use any of those, they will know immediately." "Then we do not use any of those," Nathan replied. He led her to a sealed section of the shipyard. Inside was a prototype engine, unlike anything ever built. It was small, barely larger than a desk, but it hummed with quiet power. "We call it the Whisper Drive," Nathan said. "It bends space in a way the Conclave has never seen. It leaves no energy signature. It makes no sound. A ship using this drive could fly past those platforms and they would never know." Karen stared at the engine with wonder. "How long until we can build more?" Nathan smiled. It was a hard smile, full of patience and determination. "We have time," he said. "The Conclave thinks we are dying. Let them think that. Let them forget we exist. We will build our fleet in silence, and when we are ready, we will remind them of their mistake." The years passed slowly in the void sector. One generation gave way to the next. Children were born who had never seen Earth, who had never known any life except exile. But they grew up hearing the stories. They grew up knowing what had been stolen from them. They grew up with fire in their hearts. Elena Santos, Maria's granddaughter, became the leading scientist of her generation. She developed atmospheric processors that slowly changed the air of New Dawn, making it easier to breathe. She built water purifiers that cleaned the underground rivers. She designed habitats that could house millions of people in comfort. Under her leadership, the exile worlds transformed. Cities rose from the rock. Farms spread across the surface. Schools taught children mathematics and science and history. And always, in the secret caverns below, the work continued. By the 120th year of exile, humanity had recovered. The population had grown to 15 billion. The 6 worlds of the void sector were all inhabited now, connected by transport ships that flew through space in absolute silence. Commander Jack Palmer took over Project Silence when Nathan Ford finally passed away at the age of 97. Jack was young and ambitious, but he understood the importance of patience. He had grown up hearing Nathan's words. We do not rush. We do not make mistakes. We build slowly and carefully. And when we strike only once. The fleet grew larger every year, hidden in asteroid fields and hollow moons, disguised as mining operations and research stations. 1,000 ships waited for the day of return. Then 2,000. Then 5,000. Jack spent hours studying the reports from the scout ships. Yes, there were scout ships now. Small vessels crewed by 2 or 3 people. They slipped past the orbital platforms and ventured into conclave space. They never made contact. They never revealed themselves. They only watched and listened and sent back information. What they found was encouraging. The great alliance of the 12 elder species was not as strong as it had once been. There were arguments over territory. There were disputes over trade. The Kellery and the Vorthani, once close allies, had fought 3 small wars in the past century. They are weakening, Jack said to his council. Not quickly, but steadily. In another 100 years, they may be ready to tear themselves apart. Another 100 years, said Admiral Susan Cole, Daniel's great-granddaughter. My ancestors started this plan 300 years ago. How long must we wait? Jack looked at her with understanding. He knew the frustration. He felt it himself. 300 years of hiding. 300 years of silence. 300 years of watching the stars and dreaming of the day they could take back what was stolen. We wait until we are certain, he said. We have one chance. Only one. If we move too soon, if the conclave discovers us before we are ready, everything our ancestors built will be destroyed. Everything they suffered will be for nothing. We owe them more than impatience. She did not like the answer, but she understood it. Humans had learned patience in the darkness of exile. It was the hardest lesson they had ever learned, but it was also the most important. The work continued. The fleet grew. The scouts watched and waited. And deep beneath the surface of New Dawn, in a chamber carved from solid rock, the leaders of humanity gathered every year to repeat the same oath that Daniel Cole had spoken on the first night of exile. We will not die. We will not fade. We will not be forgotten. We will build. We will grow. We will become stronger than we ever were before. And one day, our children will return to the stars. The words echoed through the cavern, spoken by 100 voices united in purpose. They had been thrown into darkness. They had been sentenced to silence. But the silence was not empty. The silence was full of preparation. And soon, very soon, the galaxy would hear humanity's voice once more. Grace Ellis was born on a ship. Her mother had been a scout, and her father had been a scout, and now Grace was a scout too. It was in her blood. It was in her bones. She had spent her whole life moving through the darkness between stars, watching the enemies who had destroyed her people. Her ship was called the Silent Wind. It was small, barely 50 meters long, designed for speed and stealth. The whisper drive hummed beneath her feet, bending space without leaving any trace. She had flown past Conclave warships so close she could see the lights in their windows, and they had never known she was there. Today, she was deep in Conclave territory, floating in the debris field of what had once been a Kalari trading station. The station had been destroyed 3 weeks ago in a battle with the Vorthani Empire. Bodies floated in the void around her, frozen and silent. Ships drifted without power, their hulls torn open by weapons fire. Grace watched the destruction with cold eyes. She had seen many things like this in her 20 years as a scout. The Conclave was tearing itself apart, just as the human leaders had predicted. The alliance that had once united the galaxy was crumbling. The 12 elder species, so proud and powerful when they had sentenced humanity to exile, were now at each other's throats. "Recording complete," said Adam Wright, her co-pilot. He was a quiet man with steady hands and sharp eyes. He had been Grace's partner for 5 years now. She trusted him with her life. Grace nodded and began plotting a course back to the Void sector. The journey would take 3 weeks, slipping through enemy space like a ghost. They would bring their recordings back to the command center on New Dawn, where the analysts would study every detail. "How many stations is that now?" Adam asked. 17 this year, Grace replied. "The Kellerai and the Vorthani are fighting over the trade routes in this sector. Neither side is willing to back down." "Good for us," Adam said quietly. Grace did not answer. She understood what he meant, but she could not bring herself to celebrate the deaths of others, even enemies. The Conclave had done terrible things to humanity. They had thrown her ancestors into darkness and left them to die. But the people floating dead in this debris field had not made that decision. They were just traders and workers and families caught in the middle of someone else's war. Still, she could not deny the truth. Every battle weakened the Conclave. Every war brought humanity's day of return closer. It was a cold calculation, but it was necessary. The Silent Wind slipped away from the debris field and began its long journey home. 3 weeks later, Grace stood in the command center of New Dawn, presenting her findings to Admiral Chris Blake. He was an old man now, over 70 years old, but his mind was still sharp and his will was still strong. He had been commander of Project Silence for 30 years, longer than anyone before him. "The Kalari-Vorthani conflict is spreading," Grace reported. 3 more systems have been drawn into the fighting. The Kalari are losing ground, but they refuse to surrender. Admiral Blake studied the star maps on the wall. Red dots marked the locations of known conflicts. There were more red dots every year. "What about the Zelthani?" he asked. The Zelthani were the insectoid species that had led the Conclave. High Arbiter Zelthax had been the one who pronounced humanity's sentence 300 years ago. "Internal problems," Grace replied. "Their worker caste is rebelling against the ruling class. They have lost control of at least 4 worlds in the past decade." Admiral Blake nodded slowly. This was the news he had been waiting for. The Zelthani were the backbone of the Conclave. If they fell, the whole alliance would collapse. "And the orbital platforms watching us?" he asked. "No changes," Grace said. "They are old technology now. The Conclave has not upgraded them in over 200 years. They have forgotten about us completely." Admiral Blake turned to face her. His eyes were hard but not unkind. "Good work, Scout Ellis. Your reports have been invaluable. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Yes, sir." "In your opinion, how much longer should we wait?" It was a question that every human asked themselves. How much longer? They had been waiting for 300 years. 300 years of silence, of hiding, of watching from the shadows. The fleet was ready. The plans were complete. Every ship knew its target. Every soldier knew their mission. They could strike tomorrow, if the admiral gave the order. Grace thought carefully before answering. "The conclave is weak," she said, "but they are not broken yet. If we strike now, we could win, but it would be costly. Many of us would die. And if we wait? Another 10 years, maybe 20, and they will be too weak to resist. We could take back everything, with almost no losses." Admiral Blake smiled. It was a sad smile, the smile of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for something he might never see. "Patience," he said. "That is what my predecessor taught me. That is what his predecessor taught him. We have waited this long. We can wait a little longer." Grace returned to her ship and her endless patrols, but the conversation stayed with her. She wondered if she would live to see the day of return. She wondered if her children would, or would it be her grandchildren, or her great-grandchildren, who finally emerged from the darkness and took back the stars. The years continued to pass. The scouts continued to watch, and the conclave continued to destroy itself. The Kalari and the Vorthani fought their war to a bloody stalemate. Both species lost half their population. Both species lost most of their fleet. When the fighting finally ended, they were too weak to threaten anyone. The Zalthani rebellion spread from world to world. The ruling class tried to crush it with force, but force only made it worse. Within 50 years, the Zalthani Empire had split into 3 factions, each one claiming to be the true heir of their ancestors. The other elder species watched the chaos with fear. Some tried to take advantage, seizing territory while their rivals were distracted. Others retreated to their home systems, building defenses against threats that might never come. The Great Conclave, which had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, was dying. Grace was 60 years old when Admiral Blake finally called the meeting. Her hair was gray now, and her hands were not as steady as they had once been. But she still flew her scout ship, still watched the enemy, still waited for the day of return. "It is time," Admiral Blake said. He was over 100 years old now, kept alive by medicine and technology developed in the exile. His voice was weak, but his words were strong. "I have spent my entire life waiting for this moment. I will not live to see its completion. But I know that you will carry out our plan. You will return to the stars. You will show the galaxy what humanity has become." He looked around the room, at the officers and commanders gathered before him. They were the children of exile, the grandchildren of exile, the great-grandchildren of exile. None of them had ever seen Earth. None of them had ever known any life except the void sector. But they all carried the same fire in their hearts. They all remembered what had been done to their people. "In 6 months," Admiral Blake continued, "our fleet will emerge from the void sector. We will disable the orbital platforms. We will move through conclave space like shadows, and we will take back everything that was stolen from us. Not for revenge, not for conquest, but to prove that humanity cannot be destroyed. Humanity cannot be silenced. Humanity cannot be forgotten." The room was silent. 312 years of waiting, and it was finally over. The return was about to begin. Grace felt tears on her cheeks. She thought of her parents, who had died in service to this dream. She thought of her grandparents, who had built the first scout ships. She thought of Daniel Cole and Lisa Morgan, standing in chains before the conclave, hearing their death sentence. "We remember," she whispered. "We always remember." Admiral Amanda West stood on the bridge of the Humanity's memory and looked out at the fleet she commanded. 10,000 ships hung in the darkness, their running lights off, their engines silent. They were hidden in an asteroid field at the edge of the void sector, waiting for the order that would change everything. Amanda was 52 years old. She had trained for this moment since she was a child. Her father had been a fleet commander. Her grandmother had been one of the first scout captains. Her family had served the dream of return for generations, and now she was the one who would make that dream real. "All ships report ready," said Captain Ryan Moore, her second in command. He was a calm man with a deep voice and steady nerves. He had served with Amanda for 20 years. Amanda nodded. Her heart was beating fast, but her face showed nothing. A commander could not show fear. A commander could only show strength. "Begin Operation Silence." The order went out across the fleet. Within seconds, 10,000 ships began to move, their whisper drives bending space without a sound. They slipped past the orbital platforms that had watched over humanity for 300 years, and the platforms never detected a thing. The old sensors, designed to find conventional engines, saw nothing but empty space. Amanda watched the platforms fall behind her. They grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely. For the first time in her life, she was outside the void sector. She was in enemy territory. "We are through," Ryan said quietly. "All ships confirmed successful passage." Amanda allowed herself a small smile. The first step was complete. Now came the hard part. The fleet split into 100 task forces, each one with its own mission. They spread out across conclave space like silent hunters, moving toward targets that had been planned for decades. Commander Sam Perry led his task force toward the Zelthani homeworld. His mission was simple: destroy their communication arrays. Without communications, the Zelthani could not coordinate their defense. Without coordination, they could not fight back. Sam was a young commander, only 30 years old, but he had proven himself in countless training exercises. He was aggressive and creative, exactly the kind of officer needed for this mission. "Target in range," reported Lieutenant Megan Stone, his weapons officer. "Their defense grid is minimal. Most of their military is fighting the rebellion on their outer worlds." Sam nodded. The Zelthani were so busy fighting themselves that they had left their homeworld almost undefended. "Fire," Sam ordered. 100 missiles streaked through space toward the communication arrays. They were silent weapons, using the same technology as the whisper drives, leaving no trace until they hit their targets. The Zelthani did not even know they were under attack until the explosions began. Within minutes, every major communication hub on the Zelthani homeworld was destroyed. The insectoid species that had once ruled the galaxy was now deaf and blind. Captain Diana Ross led her task force toward the wormhole gates. These gates connected the core worlds of the Conclave, allowing ships to travel vast distances in seconds. If the gates fell under human control, no Conclave fleet could respond to the attacks. Diana was a careful commander, the opposite of Sam Perry. She planned every move in advance and never took unnecessary risks. Her crew trusted her completely. The gates were defended by a small fleet of Vorthani warships. They were old vessels, damaged in the recent wars, crewed by tired soldiers who had seen too much fighting. They never expected an attack from the void sector. They never expected an attack from humans at all. Diana's ships emerged from silence like ghosts. The Vorthani had no warning. Their sensors showed nothing until the first missiles hit their shields. The battle was short and brutal. The human ships moved with perfect coordination, trained to work together through decades of exercises. The Vorthani fought bravely, but they were outmatched and outnumbered. Within an hour, their fleet was destroyed. Diana did not celebrate. She knew that the Vorthani soldiers had families, just like humans did. But this was war. War demanded sacrifices. "Nothing gets through without our permission." On the other side of Conclave space, Lieutenant Ben Howard led a small team on the most dangerous mission of all. They were not soldiers. They were hackers, the best humanity had ever produced. Their target was the central database of the Conclave. It was a massive station orbiting a dead star, protected by layers of security that had been built up over thousands of years. Inside that database was everything: the records of the trial that had condemned humanity, the technology that had been stolen from them, the secrets of every species in the galaxy. Ben was 25 years old, the youngest member of his team. But he was also the most skilled. He had been breaking into systems since he was a child, and there was no code he could not crack. "I am in their outer firewall," he reported. His fingers moved across his keyboard with incredible speed. "Give me 5 minutes." His team worked around him, each one attacking a different part of the system. They moved through the digital defenses like water through cracks in a dam. Every barrier fell. Every trap was avoided. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became 15. But finally, Ben let out a breath of relief. "We have access," he said. "Full access. Everything they have is ours now." He began downloading. 3,000 years of Conclave technology, history, and secrets flowed into human storage systems. At the same time, he began deleting the records of humanity's trial, the sentence of exile, the lies that had been told about human aggression and expansion. All of it was erased, as if it had never existed. "The galaxy will know the truth," Ben whispered. "They will know what really happened." Admiral Amanda West received reports from all her task forces. One by one, they confirmed success. The communication arrays were down. The wormhole gates were secured. The database had been captured. Across Conclave space, confusion was spreading. Governments could not contact each other. Fleets could not receive orders. The Great Alliance was paralyzed. "It is time," Amanda said. "Open all channels. Broadcast on every frequency." Her face appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds. In council chambers and military headquarters, in homes and schools and public squares, billions of beings saw a human face for the first time in 3 centuries. "My name is Admiral Amanda West," she said. Her voice was calm and strong. "I speak for the human species. 312 years ago, you exiled us. You took our homes, you took our technology, you threw us into the darkness and left us to die. You called us dangerous, you called us vermin, you thought we would disappear." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We did not disappear. We survived. We grew stronger. We built a fleet that slipped past your defenses without a sound. We took your communications, your gates, your databases. Your entire civilization is now in our hands." Across the galaxy, panic spread. Leaders demanded explanations. Soldiers scrambled for weapons that would do no good. The species that had once ruled the stars were helpless before an enemy they had forgotten. "But we did not come for revenge," Amanda continued. "We did not come to destroy you or enslave you or take your worlds. We came to show you that you were wrong. Humanity is not a disease. Humanity is not a threat. Humanity is a species that survives, that adapts, that rises above any challenge you throw at us. Remember this day. Remember that the species you sentenced to silence has returned, and we are just getting started." The broadcast ended. Amanda stood on her bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, on a world called Earth, her ancestors had once looked up at the same stars and dreamed of the future. They had dreamed of this moment. And now, at last, it had arrived. The years that followed humanity's return were years of change. The old order of the galaxy was gone. The Conclave, which had ruled for thousands of years, collapsed completely within a decade. The 12 elder species, once so powerful and proud, scattered to the winds like leaves in a storm. Some species begged humanity for protection. The Kalari, who had started the first war with the Vorthani, sent ambassadors to New Dawn, asking for alliance. The Vorthani, their ancient enemies, did the same. They were desperate now, afraid of each other, afraid of the chaos spreading across the galaxy, afraid of the species they had once thrown into darkness. Others fled. The Zelthani ruling class abandoned their homeworld and disappeared into the outer reaches of the galaxy. They were hunted by their own people, the workers they had oppressed for so long. Their empire, which had lasted for 10,000 years, was gone in less than a generation. Humanity chose mercy. President Matthew Lane stood before the First Galactic Assembly, a new council that met on a space station built by human engineers in the orbit of a neutral world. The station was called Hope, because that was what it represented. Hope for a better future. Hope for peace. The assembly chamber was vast, filled with representatives from hundreds of species. Some were the former elder races, humbled and afraid. Others were younger species, races that had been oppressed under conclave rule for centuries. They had come together because humanity had invited them. They had come together because they had no other choice. Matthew was an old man, over 70 years old, with white hair and a lined face. He had been born in the Void Sector, had grown up hearing the stories of exile and suffering, had spent his life working toward this moment. Now he stood before the galaxy and spoke for his entire species. 300 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber, my ancestors were sentenced to death. The conclave called them dangerous. The conclave said they spread like a disease. The conclave threw them into the darkest corner of the galaxy and expected them to disappear. He paused, looking around at the hundreds of faces watching him. Some were afraid, some were angry, some were simply tired. We did not disappear, Matthew continued. We survived. We grew strong. We built a fleet that conquered your entire civilization in a single day. We could have destroyed you. We had the power. We had the weapons. We had 300 years of anger and pain that demanded revenge. The chamber was silent. Everyone knew this was true. Everyone knew that humanity held the fate of the galaxy in its hands. But that is not what we chose, Matthew said. We chose to be better than those who wronged us. We chose to build something new instead of tearing down what remained. We returned to the stars not as conquerors, but as equals. Not as masters, but as partners. The old conclave is dead. Let us create something better in its place. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy. Billions of beings heard Matthew's words. Many did not believe him. Many thought it was a trick, a way to make them lower their guard. But slowly, over the years that followed, they began to understand that humanity meant what it said. Human ships brought food to worlds suffering from famine. Human engineers helped rebuild cities destroyed in the wars between elder species. Human doctors developed cures for diseases that had plagued alien races for centuries. Wherever there was need, humanity responded. It was not easy. Old hatreds died slowly. Some species never forgave humanity for humiliating them. Some humans never forgave the conclave for the exile. There were incidents, conflicts, moments when it seemed like the new peace might collapse. But it held. Year after year, it held. Grace Ellis, now 80 years old and retired from the Scout Service, watched the changes from her home on New Dawn. She had spent her life watching enemies. Now, she watched friends. I never thought I would see this, she said to her granddaughter, Nora Blake. I thought the war would go on forever. I thought we would destroy each other. Nora smiled. She was 30 years old, tall and strong, with her grandmother's sharp eyes. She wore the uniform of a starship captain, but her ship was not a warship. It was an exploration vessel, designed to venture beyond the known galaxy and find new worlds. You taught me that humans are capable of anything, Nora said. Destruction or creation, war or peace. We just have to choose. And what do you choose? Nora looked out the window at the stars. "I choose the unknown," she said. "I choose to see what is out there, beyond everything we know. I choose to carry humanity further than we have ever gone before." 3 months later, Nora stood on the bridge of her ship, the Horizon. It was the first joint exploration vessel crewed by humans and Kellery and Vorthani working together. For centuries, these species had been enemies. Now they served side by side, united by curiosity and hope. "All systems ready," reported her first officer, a Kellery named Tarek. His scales shimmered in the bridge lights. His people had once helped condemn humanity to exile. Now he served under a human captain and called her friend. "Navigation confirmed," added her science officer, a young Vorthani named Pella. Her large eyes reflected the stars on the view screen. Her ancestors had fought wars that killed billions. Now, she searched for new worlds to explore instead of destroy. Nora looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew, human and alien, former enemies working together for a common purpose. This was what 300 years of exile had created. Not revenge, not conquest, but something new, something better. "Open a channel," she said. "I want to make a ship-wide announcement." The channel opened. Every member of the crew, in every section of the ship, heard her voice. "This is Captain Nora Blake," she said. "Today, we begin a journey that our ancestors could not have imagined. 300 years ago, my people were exiled to the Void Sector. They were told that they were too dangerous to exist. They were told that they would be forgotten. But they were not forgotten. They survived, they built, they waited, and now we are here. Human and Kellery and Vorthani together, ready to explore the unknown." She paused, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. She thought of Daniel Cole, standing in chains before the conclave. She thought of Admiral Amanda West, leading the fleet of return. She thought of her grandmother Grace, watching from the shadows for 40 years. "They tried to silence us," Nora continued. "They tried to make us disappear. But you cannot silence humanity. You can only make us more determined. And now, for the first time in history, we venture beyond the known galaxy together. Not as enemies, not as exiles, but as explorers. Let us see what wonders await us." The crew cheered, human voices mixed with Kellery clicks and Vorthani whistles. It was a strange sound, but it was also beautiful. It was the sound of the future. "Engage whisper drive," Nora ordered. The Horizon shuddered as the drive activated. Space bent around them, folding them into the void. And then they were gone, vanishing into the darkness beyond the stars. On 1,000 worlds, humans and aliens watched the ship disappear. They saw the lights of its engines fade into nothing, carrying their hopes and dreams into the unknown. And somewhere, in the vast emptiness between galaxies, the spirit of humanity continued its endless journey. They had been thrown into darkness. They had risen from silence. They had shaken the galaxy with their return. And now they were just getting started. The exile was over. The silence was broken. And the future belonged to everyone brave enough to reach for it. This was the legacy of humanity. Not war, not revenge, but hope. Endless, unstoppable hope. And the galaxy would never be the same. The Great Hall of the Galactic Conclave was cold. It was always cold. The 12 elder species who ruled the galaxy preferred low temperatures, and they did not care if the creatures standing before them were comfortable or not. Admiral Daniel Cole stood in the center of the hall with chains around his wrists. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. Behind him stood Lisa Morgan, the lead diplomat of humanity. She was younger than Daniel, but today she looked old. They both looked old. The weight of what was happening pressed down on them like a mountain. Around them, in seats that rose up like a great circle, sat the representatives of the 12 elder species. They were strange creatures. Some had too many eyes, some had no eyes at all. Some were made of light and shadow. Some were insects, the size of cars. They had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, and they had decided that humanity was a problem that needed to be solved. High Arbiter Zelthax rose from his seat. He was the leader of the conclave, a massive insectoid creature with black shell armor and mandibles that clicked when he spoke. His voice echoed through the hall like the sound of stones grinding together. "Humanity," Zelthax said, "you have been judged." Daniel did not move. He kept his eyes forward and his back straight. He was a soldier, and soldiers did not show fear, but inside, his heart was breaking. 200 years ago, Zelthax continued, your species made first contact with the Kalari trading vessels. You were primitive then. You had only just learned to travel between stars. We welcomed you. We gave you knowledge. We gave you technology. We gave you a place among the civilized races of the galaxy. Her voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the anger beneath it. We were grateful for everything the Conclave gave us. We asked only for trade and friendship. We never attacked anyone. We never threatened anyone. Zelthax's mandibles clicked rapidly. It was the insectoid version of a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You did not need to attack, he said. Your very existence is an attack. In 200 years you expanded from 1 world to 47. Your population grew from 8 billion to 60 billion. You developed weapons that rivaled our own. You built ships faster than we thought possible. You are a disease that spreads without end. We are a people, Daniel said quietly. We have the same right to exist as any other species in this galaxy. Rights are given by power, Zelthax replied, and you have no power here. The Conclave has voted. The decision is final. Humanity is hereby exiled to the Void Sector. You will be stripped of all advanced technology. You will not leave. You will be forgotten. A murmur went through the hall. The Void Sector was the darkest corner of the galaxy. It was a region of space so far from the core worlds that no Conclave species had ever bothered to explore it. The stars there were old and dying. The planets were harsh and barren. It was not a place to live. It was a place to die. Lisa's composure finally broke. You are sentencing 12 billion people to death, she said, her voice rising. Children, families, people who have done nothing wrong. This is not justice. This is murder. Zelthax did not even look at her. The sentence will be carried out within 30 standard days. All human colonies will be evacuated. All human technology will be confiscated. Any human found outside the Void Sector after the exile period will be destroyed without warning. He turned away, dismissing them as if they were nothing. As if 12 billion lives meant nothing at all. The guards came then, large reptilian creatures with cold eyes and weapons that hummed with deadly energy. They took Daniel and Lisa out of the Great Hall and threw them into a holding cell. The door slammed shut behind them with a sound like a tomb closing. Lisa sat down on the cold floor and put her head in her hands. What do we do now? She asked. How do we survive this? Daniel sat down beside her. For a long moment, he said nothing. He thought about his family back on Earth. His daughter was 12 years old. His son was only 7. They would grow up in exile, on some barren rock at the edge of nowhere, and they would never know the green hills and blue oceans of their home world. We survive, he said finally. That is what humans do. We survive, and we adapt, and we remember. Lisa looked up at him. Her eyes were red, but there was something hard in them now. Something that had not been there before. Remember what? She asked. Daniel stood up and walked to the small window of the cell. Outside he could see the great ships of the Conclave fleet, thousands of vessels that had conquered the galaxy. They were beautiful in a terrible way, like knives made of starlight. "We remember what they did to us," he said. "We remember that they called us vermin. We remember that they took everything from us and threw us into the darkness. And one day, when our children's children have grown strong, we come back, and we show them that they made a mistake." The exile began 3 weeks later. The Conclave was efficient. Daniel had to give them that. Their ships came to every human colony, every space station, every outpost. They gave the humans 1 day to gather what they could carry, and then they forced them onto transport ships at gunpoint. Daniel stood on the surface of humanity's homeworld for the last time, and watched as millions of people were herded toward the transport vessels. Families cried. Children screamed for parents they had lost in the chaos. Old people fell and were trampled. The Conclave guards did not care. They had their orders. Kevin Price, Daniel's second-in-command, found him standing alone near the ruins of what had once been New York City. "Sir," Kevin said, "the last transport is leaving in 1 hour. We need to go." Daniel nodded slowly. He bent down and picked up a handful of dirt. Earth dirt, the soil of his ancestors. He put it in his pocket. "One day," he said quietly, "one day we will come back." The transport ships carried them across the galaxy, past the bright core worlds, past the trading routes and the great stations, into the darkness of the void sector. The journey took weeks. Many people died along the way. The Conclave did not provide enough food or water or medicine. They did not care if all the humans arrived alive. They only cared that humanity was gone. When they finally reached the void sector, Daniel saw their new home for the first time. It was a cluster of rocky planets orbiting a dim red star. The largest planet had a thin atmosphere and no water on the surface. The soil was gray and lifeless. It was the most depressing sight Daniel had ever seen. They named it New Dawn because they needed hope, and hope begins with names. The Conclave left orbital platforms above the planets. These platforms were not there to help. They were there to watch. They were there to make sure no human ship ever left the void sector. They were prison guards made of metal and fire. On the first night, Daniel gathered the leaders of the exile together. There were scientists and soldiers, farmers and engineers. They were all that remained of human civilization. "They want us to die," Daniel said. "They want us to fade away in silence and be forgotten. But we will not die. We will not fade. We will not be forgotten. We will build. We will grow. We will become stronger than we ever were before. And one day, our children will return to the stars, not as beggars, not as refugees, but as conquerors." The people around him were tired and scared and hungry. But when they heard his words, something changed in their eyes. Fear became determination, despair became anger, and anger became hope. They had been thrown into the darkness, but darkness is not the end. It is only the beginning of something new.